So Helldivers 2 came out the other day, and despite the PC version having a very rocky start due to some horrendous optimization and terrible anti-cheat, it's been a pretty huge financial success. This game topped the Steam charts rather quickly, and according to the devs themselves, over 1 million copies were sold in the first week. And apparently the sales breakdown is about 50-50 between PC and PlayStation, again, according to the devs themselves. Helldivers 2 is living proof that Sony going day and date with their first-party games is a winning formula. There are tons of people on the PC willing to buy PlayStation games, but aren't really that down to wait a year or two after launch just to pay full price for a game that's already been spoiled for them. Helldivers 2 is proof that simply putting the PC port out at the same time as the PlayStation version will seriously juice your sales numbers because you're allowing a second platform to take part in the launch hype of one of your games. And at this point, all the roads lead to Sony going day and date with all of their exclusives. I'm really failing to see how even Sony could look at the success of Helldivers 2 on PC and not take it as a cue to start thinking about going day and date across the board, not just for live service games. And yet, despite all of this being fantastic news for PlayStation and their first-party game output, the most faithful PlayStation diehards simply can't accept that going day and date is a good idea, nor can they wrap their head around the fact that people who don't want to buy a PlayStation are still more than capable of buying PlayStation games when they want them, and when they're made available. And so, in various threads across the last few days on Twitter, I've taken a number of screenshots of a number of incredibly salty PlayStation fanboys lashing out at the success of Helldivers 2 on PC, desperately trying to explain why the sales aren't actually important, and the PC somehow isn't a valuable market for PlayStation to push into. Helldivers 2 on PC and day and date on PC, it's all horrible and no good and very, very bad, despite, again, this actually being something that benefits the PlayStation's ecosystem. You people are a trip. Benji says, success? It's a service game. Success cannot be measured the first few days. It's an encouraging start, but it's way too early to talk about success. Right, because over 1 million copies sold for $40 a pop in the first 3 days is not actually a measure of success. Right. Like, if this game had only been released on PlayStation, all the PlayStation dudes would be waving giant flags that said 1 million in 3 days. But since it's on PC as well, suddenly, 1 million paid copies in 3 days isn't actually an indication of success, no. Especially since the Helldivers 2 developers have recently come out and said they want to earn the right to start monetizing things in-game, your definition of success literally can't be possible here, because by your definition of success that you'd seem to lay out here, you literally seem to think this game can't possibly be considered a success until after it starts live servicing all over the place. Reading this, you genuinely believe, I really need to hammer home how stupid this is, you genuinely believe Sony would fund an entire ass video game with the possibility of it literally never being considered successful because you don't think copies sold in the first few days is an indication of success for a paid game.
That just makes no fucking sense. I mean, it's just bullshit. Fuck. Oh my.
But okay, let's look at this your way. You think the game cannot be considered a success until it's been properly live serviced. Well, according to Steam Base, because Steam charts were down today, Helldivers 2 is still hosting over 130,000 concurrent players at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday. Now, we know Helldivers 2 has sold at least 500,000 copies on PC, thanks to the developers literally telling us they sold 1 million copies with more or less a 50-50 split between PC and PlayStation. That means Helldivers 2, in the middle of a work week, is still generously hosting about 20 to 30% of its buying base during non-peak times. That's pretty damn good. So if you want to judge this game based on its status as a service, if you really insist on doing that, like, yeah, it might be a little early to call things, but it's looking pretty promising so far, at least on the PC side of things. Someone just named No says PC gamers only buy multiplayer games because they have no other choice. What do you think about this? Oh, PC gamers only buy multiplayer games. Interesting. Because last time I checked, PC gamers actually buy a lot of single-player games. Cyberpunk 2077 reportedly sold over 13 million copies in its first 3 weeks, and over half of those copies were on the PC. That game has no multiplayer at all. PlayStation themselves have had a lot of financial success with single-player games on the PC. Horizon Zero Dawn sold over 3.3 million copies. God of War is up to 2.5 million. Days Gone is on its way to 2 million. Spider-Man will surely eventually hit 2 million. Like, these are great sales numbers for single-player games that were released years after the PlayStation version, and all the storytelling had been long spoiled for people. So just imagine how much money would be made off single-player games if the PC was included with that initial hype campaign, like how Helldivers 2 included the PC players. Like, let it sink in that on the first 3 days on the market, Helldivers 2 on PC outsold Uncharted 4 on PC. Stuff like this can and should be paid attention to, especially by Sony. At Ultra Egyptian says for games like Helldivers, this strategy makes sense. However, Sony won't release a game like God of War, for example, on PC day one. Classic example of a PlayStation fanboy just not providing any evidence of something, despite there really needing to be evidence in order for their point to make any fucking sense. You say that for Helldivers 2, the strategy makes sense, so we agree that Helldivers 2 day and date on PC has been a good thing, it's been a success. But then you say Sony won't release single-player games on PC because... no explanation. The AA live service PlayStation game, that does make sense to release on PC, and we agree that it's been successful releasing on PC. But the AAA single-player games that PlayStation is much more known for on a larger scale, and games that will get a much heavier marketing push, that doesn't make sense to put on PC. Because I said so, basically. Like, burden of proof is on you here, bud, because we have evidence that PlayStation games day and date on PC works to a rather grand degree, and you're basically just saying nah without even attempting to explain why nah. And nobody ever does explain themselves when they say stuff like this, because there is no explanation for this. PlayStation games day and date on the PC would crank additional copies, but you just don't want that. For no reason. Retro tweets out, oh yeah, Sony is definitely going to pay attention to this, day and date is coming, and he gets quote tweeted by someone named Holy Flare, who says they already released Game of All Generations God of War, but it didn't do well, and on the other hand, they will release games as a service games day and date on PC, because Sony said so a couple of years ago. PC waiting race are casuals, they don't touch single-player games unless it's made by certain developers, and it doesn't sell well in the end compared to consoles. I find it interesting that you take issue with the idea of PC gamers generally having favorite developers when it comes to single-player games. Like, how is that any different from what goes on every platform? You're telling me that PlayStation gamers don't have preferred developers? You're telling me that PlayStation gamers don't show favor to Naughty Dog and Santa Monica and Insomniac in an almost identical way to the way that PC gamers tend to show favor towards Valve or FromSoft or CD Projekt? Like, different platforms tend to have different poster childs, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you can't act like the only reason single-player games get sold on PC is because they're by the poster child, when not only is there evidence that this is just not true at all, because tons of single-player games from tons of different developers get tons of success on this platform, but it's also insanely hypocritical for this to come from someone defending PlayStation, a platform that's largely based around artificially making their player base care about a small list of single-player game developers. Frankie says releasing day one has less to do with the success than the price. Yeah, no, you're literally wrong. The success of Helldivers 2 on PC is absolutely connected to it being day and date. Sure, the $40 price point is nice, but it's selling at $40 on the PlayStation as well, so there's not a price advantage for the PC version, meaning yes, this actually is related to day and date more than price, because both versions are selling really well. They're both going for the same price, but only one of these versions is experiencing the Sony day and date as a relatively new factor. And it's funny that someone brought up God of War in the last tweet, because that game sold over 2.5 million copies, while also going for less than the usual price of a new game, but that game didn't have the day and date factor, so a lot of people didn't see it as an exciting event that should be jumped on as soon as possible like the PlayStation crowd did. There's no denying that God of War is a much bigger game than Helldivers 2, and yet Helldivers 2 was still the biggest PC launch for a Sony game. It's almost like day and date is significant. It should be really obvious that day and date played a big part of Helldivers 2 being so successful right out of the gate on PC. Sony should be paying attention to this, and no doubt they've taken note of it. What happens next is going to be the really interesting part, though. Shy Vortex tweets out a couple screenshots of the Steam chart saying 220,000 concurrent users across PC and PlayStation 5. PC peaked today at more than 144,000, more than half of that value. Can we finally stop with the false narratives of PC gamers don't buy games? And then someone named Aaron the Diver responds, that's a narrative created by PC gamers and YouTubers boasting every day. They pirate everything, backed up by publishers spending big money for DRM, even though they know consumers don't like it. Maybe the full narrative is gamers do not buy games unless it has strong DRM. So you're staring at evidence that a PC game sold really well, and your takeaway from that is that gamers still pirate all their games, and this is the one exception, basically just because I said so. In fact, you imply here that it's a good thing that more games are using insane DRM, because that's supposedly the only time PC gamers buy games. Well, Pal World sold over 18 million copies on Steam in a matter of weeks. Hogwarts Legacy was the second highest grossing game on Steam in all of 2023. Cyberpunk 2077 sold like crazy on the PC. A number of PlayStation games have sold very well on PC, and I don't remember any of these games having particularly egregious DRM. Certainly nothing to the level of what's in Helldivers 2. So I'm really not sure what you're trying to say here or what point you're trying to make. Again, other than just trying to make all PC gamers out as pirates despite literally making eye contact with evidence to the contrary, because this is the kind of stuff that you just enjoy wasting your time on. These are the kinds of hills you want to die on, but like, why? Like, what is to be gained by just lying about things on behalf of Sony? Like, are you expecting a high five from them or something? Like, truly, what purpose does this serve? Renee says, you guys keep coping. Only PlayStation games will be on PlayStation and PC the day of release, not offline first-party games. Some of them will be on PC 1 to 2 years after release. The PC Master Race bots are a bunch of port beggars. Don't you guys not have enough games to play? Well, for starters, thanks for just indirectly admitting that you know PC has more games to play than you. Bold strategy, Cotton. But again, another example of a PlayStation fanboy just saying something that really needs evidence to back it up and then completely omitting the evidence. In response to a thread about how well Helldivers 2 is doing on PC, which is evidence that your point doesn't actually make any sense, you need to provide evidence to back up what you say here. Because we, the PC gamers, are saying, hey, day-and-date PlayStation games on PC seem to have a much bigger impact on the PC sales charts than multi-year-old PlayStation ports with no marketing, and Helldivers 2 is our evidence for believing that. But then you, the PlayStation fanboy, come along, and you're basically just saying, yeah, actually Sony said day and date isn't happening, but that means it'll never happen ever, even though there's solid evidence that from a business perspective it totally should happen, but it's not happening now and things will never change despite the evidence that it should. Like, do you see how this isn't actually a good argument? We're pointing out reasons for things to change, and you're basically saying our points are invalid because the things haven't changed yet. And that's not a real argument. That doesn't make any sense. Look, Helldivers 2 being so successful on PC is a good thing for literally everyone. It's good for the developers because more people are appreciating their work sooner because the game isn't being artificially held hostage, at least not as drastically as other PlayStation games have been. It's good for the consumer because they're no longer faced with a $500 ultimatum when PlayStation announces a game they're interested in, but insist on holding it on the PS5. And it's good for Sony themselves because they're now making more money off of projects that normally would have a hard cap on how many copies could be sold due to PlayStation exclusivity, and then they'll use that additional revenue to make more games and provide more stuff for the people in their ecosystem. More PlayStation games ditching exclusivity is an objectively good thing for everyone, but you just can't handle that somebody would play a PlayStation game on a piece of hardware that wasn't funded by Sony. And the longer you guys continue to be loudly pathetic about this, the more you're gonna get dragged for it. That's just the way it be, me mateys. Okay, toodles.